It's 1994, and somewhere in a Seattle courtroom, Courtney Love is explaining to a very confused judge why she should control the Nirvana catalog instead of the band's former members. This is a woman who's about to spend the next 3 decades in a constant state of warfare with literally everyone who's ever crossed her path. And somehow, she's going to win most of these fights while being completely, magnificently unhinged. But here's the thing. Nobody tells you about Courtney Love. She wasn't just Kurt Cobain's widow or the frontwoman of Hole. She was a one-woman demolition crew aimed directly at every sacred cow in rock music. And she had the audacity to be right about most of it. The music industry, the media, her own bandmates, Kurt's former friends, they all learned the hard way that you don't start a fight with someone who treats controversy like performance art. This is the story of how Courtney Love became the most hated woman in rock music, while simultaneously being one of its most important figures. Spoiler alert, it involves enough lawsuits to keep an entire law firm busy, feuds that lasted decades, and a level of public self-destruction that would make Charlie Sheen take notes. But before we dive into this beautiful disaster of feminism, fury, and pharmaceuticals, quick thing, if you're here because you love stories about musicians who treated their entire lives like elaborate revenge plots, smash that subscribe button, because I've got approximately 17 more tales of rock stars who chose violence as their primary form of artistic expression. Also, like the video because Courtney would probably love that her chaos is still generating content, which somehow makes it even more perfect. Right, let's get properly unhinged about the most unhinged woman in rock history. So, Los Angeles, early 80s. Courtney Love, not yet Love, still Michelle Harrison, is this weird, damaged kid who looks like she was designed by someone who'd only heard punk rock described through a broken telephone. She's got this relationship with attention where normal levels feel like sensory deprivation, and she's convinced that fame is something you can will into existence through sheer force of personality. She's bouncing between strip clubs, acting classes, and various punk scenes, accumulating trauma like some people collect stamps. Foster homes, juvenile detention, a brief stint in a psychiatric facility. It's like someone took every possible origin story for a difficult artist and decided to use all of them simultaneously. The early Hole lineup is constantly shifting because Courtney has this talent for finding exactly the right musicians and then driving them completely insane. She's not just looking for people who can play, she wants collaborators in her mission to make the most confrontational music possible while looking like damaged beauty queens. But first there's the Billy Corgan situation. Before Kurt, Courtney's dating the Smashing Pumpkins frontman in 1991, and it's exactly as dramatic as you'd expect when two people with industrial-strength egos try to occupy the same relationship. Billy's got his own control issues, Courtney's got her need to be the center of attention, and somehow they think this is going to work out well. The breakup is peak Billy Corgan pettiness. He refuses to pay for Courtney's flight home from a festival, so she ends up on a ferry with some guy named Kurt Cobain. Worst financial decision in rock history, Billy. That ferry ride basically cost you watching your ex-girlfriend become the wife of the biggest rock star in the world, while you're stuck explaining why you're too cheap to buy plane tickets. Then, 1991 happens properly. That ferry ride with Kurt turns into the most consequential boat trip since the Titanic, except this one creates a rock power couple instead of maritime disaster. Courtney meets Kurt, and suddenly the stakes of everything change completely. 2 hurricanes deciding to occupy the same space and see what happens to the local weather patterns. They're perfect for each other in the most destructive way possible. Kurt's got this self-loathing that attracts Courtney's aggressive self-confidence, and Courtney's got this need for validation that Kurt's fame can temporarily satisfy. It's romantic, but it's also like watching 2 people try to cure their heroin addiction by doing more heroin. Live Through This comes out in 1994, 4 days after Kurt's death, and suddenly Courtney is the widow of a rock god with an album that's too good to ignore and too perfectly timed to not seem suspicious. The conspiracy theories start immediately. How convenient that Courtney's best album comes out right after her husband's death. How convenient that she now controls his estate. How convenient that she seems more focused on her career than grieving. The internet is barely invented and people are already using it to accuse Courtney of murder. Here's where Courtney's genius reveals itself. Instead of trying to be respectable, she leans into the controversy. Every interview becomes a performance piece about grief, addiction, and the music industry's misogyny. She's crying, she's raging, she's making accusations, and somehow she's also promoting her album. The Dave Grohl situation gets ugly fast. Foo Fighters versus Courtney Love isn't just about Nirvana's legacy, it's about who gets to define what Kurt meant. Dave wants to move forward respectfully, Courtney wants to burn everything down and dance in the ashes. Neither approach is wrong, but they're completely incompatible. Dave's response is, "I'll stick around," which is about as diplomatic as a middle finger wrapped in guitar feedback. The song doesn't name Courtney, but everyone knows who Dave is singing about when he talks about not owing anything. Meanwhile, Courtney's fighting back through music magazines, claiming Kurt spent more time with Hole than Nirvana because he preferred Hole's music. Then in the early 2000s, she escalates by accusing Dave of acting inappropriately towards Frances Bean, which gets disproved pretty quickly. Their relationship never recovers. Unless you count their awkward interaction at the Nirvana Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction as an improvement, which honestly might be the most civil they've ever been in public. The legal battles begin in earnest. Courtney's fighting Dave and Krist Novoselic over Nirvana's catalog, fighting her own record label over Hole's contracts, fighting journalists about their coverage, fighting random people on the internet who suggested she's anything less than a misunderstood genius. But here's the thing. She's winning most of these fights. The Nirvana estate is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and Courtney controls most of it. Live Through This is getting critical acclaim that Hole never achieved before. She's becoming more famous than she ever was when Kurt was alive. The media can't figure out how to cover her. Traditional rock journalism doesn't have a framework for someone who's simultaneously victim and villain, tragic widow, and opportunistic careerist. So they just decide she's crazy and hope that explains everything. Courtney's response is to get crazier. If they want a train wreck, she'll give them the most spectacular train wreck in rock history. Drug arrests, award show outbursts, feuds with other musicians. She turns her entire life into performance art about how women are treated when they refuse to be polite. The 90s become one long Courtney Love controversy tour. She's fighting with Tori Amos about Kurt's memory, fighting with Eddie Vedder about Pearl Jam's success, fighting with journalists who suggest she's exploiting her husband's death. But the real nuclear option comes from Trent Reznor, and the backstory is almost too petty to believe. Hole and Nine Inch Nails tour together in 1994. Trent and Courtney have a brief relationship, and Courtney decides to end it by telling Spin magazine, "Don't call your band 9 Inch Nails if you have a 3-inch one." Which honestly is maybe the most devastating breakup line in rock history. Trent's response takes a few years to cook, but Starfuckers Inc. is basically him using his entire industrial noise arsenal to call Courtney a fame-obsessed parasite. He's building an entire sonic weapon designed specifically to destroy her reputation, which seems like a proportional response to having your penis size questioned in a national music magazine. Meanwhile, Billy Corgan's watching all this from the sidelines, probably feeling some combination of vindication and regret. His ex-girlfriend is now feuding with half the alternative rock scene, and he's got front row seats to the chaos he narrowly escaped. The Riot Girl situation gets messy when Kathleen Hanna starts calling out Courtney's feminism as performative. This is particularly cutting because Kathleen's criticism comes from other women who've been fighting the same battles. When the punk feminists are questioning your feminist credentials, you know you've got a PR problem. The beef starts with a backstage fight at Lollapalooza in 1995, and Courtney holds on to this grudge like it's a family heirloom. Fast forward to 2019, Bikini Kill reunites, and Courtney's still seething. She tells Bust magazine that Kathleen is a good hype man, but calls her persona DIY nonsense dilettante and says they suck. 24 years later, and she's still mad about whatever happened backstage in the 90s. The acting career starts as another way to shock people, but then Courtney turns out to be genuinely good at it. The People vs. Larry Flynt gets her an Oscar nomination, which somehow makes everyone even more angry. She's not supposed to be talented, she's supposed to be a cautionary tale. But success doesn't calm Courtney down. It makes her more aggressive. Now she's fighting studio executives, fighting other actors, fighting the entire concept of Hollywood respectability. She shows up to award shows looking like a deranged fairy tale princess and uses acceptance speeches to settle personal scores. The 2000s bring new targets and old grudges. She's fighting with Frances Bean, her own daughter, over Kurt Cobain's guitars. She's fighting with Nirvana's surviving members over a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. She's fighting with random people on the internet who've made the mistake of mentioning Kurt in interviews. She starts dating Billy Corgan again. Yes, again, which is like watching two people decide to have the same car accident twice to see if it hurts less the second time. Spoiler, it doesn't. Billy's still a control freak, Courtney's still impossible, and now they both have decades of additional baggage and public feuds to bring to the relationship. But the real drama comes when Courtney releases Nobody's Daughter in 2010 and allegedly uses songs Billy wrote without his permission. Billy's Twitter response is peak passive-aggressive rock star. My face is my face, my heart is my heart, my money is my money, oh, and my songs are my songs. Then he goes for the throat, tweeting about how maybe she should be happy she fooled someone to do her work for her, clearly referencing Kurt. And he also calls out his parenting skills, which finally gets a response from Courtney 8 years later in 2018 when she calls him out for causing drama at their age. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a guitar pick. The internet makes everything worse. Now Courtney can fight with people in real time, and she does. Twitter becomes her weapon of choice for settling grudges, making accusations, and generally terrifying anyone who's ever crossed her path. She's 55 years old, and she's cyberbullying people like a teenager with unlimited data. Then she starts going after people who weren't even around in the 90s. The Gwen Stefani situation starts when Courtney calls her a cheerleader in some dismissive interview with 17 magazine, saying she's not interested in being Gwen Stefani because Gwen's the cheerleader while Courtney's out in the smoker shed. Gwen's response is absolutely perfect. She writes Hollaback Girl specifically as a fuck you to Courtney, basically saying, you want me to be a cheerleader? Fine, I'll be the best cheerleader who ever lived and rule the whole world while I'm at it. Imagine getting so owned that your insult becomes someone else's #1 hit song. The Strokes release Is This It in 2001, and the whole world is looking towards them, including Courtney, because of course she's looking towards young blood. Courtney meets Julian Casablancas at a famous person party in LA and sits him down to have the Bono talk, for absolutely no reason besides interacting in some meaningful way. That comes from when Courtney was starting out and Bono had a dad talk with her about the responsibilities of being famous and all that stuff. Julian tells Courtney he thinks U2 are shitty and wasn't interested in hearing what she had to say. She tried to continue her lecture, but Julian walked away, past the other celebrities and over to the rest of the band. They left the party early and went bowling. Courtney finished the conversation on her own by writing a creepy-ass song called But Julian, I'm a Little Bit Older Than You, where it's impossible to tell if she's dissing or seducing him. And she's not a little bit older than him, she's 14 years older than him. Reportedly, Julian wrote Meet Me in the Bathroom as a response. Taylor Swift becomes an obsession, with Courtney alternating between trying to mentor her and publicly criticizing her career choices. Watching someone fight battles on multiple fronts simultaneously, including some fronts that don't actually exist. The Frances Bean situation gets particularly ugly. Your own daughter taking out a restraining order against you is bad enough, but when it happens in public and involves Kurt Cobain's estate, it becomes a media circus. Courtney's fighting for her relationship with her daughter while simultaneously fighting her daughter for control of her dead husband's legacy. Throughout all of this, the music industry slowly realizes that Courtney was right about most things. The sexism she complained about in the 90s is now acknowledged as real. The exploitation she fought against is now part of every discussion about artist rights. The media treatment she criticized is now seen as obviously unfair. But admitting Courtney was right means admitting they were wrong, and nobody wants to do that. So she remains the villain in her own story, even as history proves her point over and over again. The tragedy isn't that Courtney Love destroyed her relationships and alienated everyone around her. The tragedy is that she had to. Being polite would have meant being forgotten. Being reasonable would have meant being exploited. Being nice would have meant watching other people profit from her husband's death while she got nothing. So she chose warfare, and she chose it every single time. Against the music industry that wanted to sideline her, against the media that wanted to destroy her, against the fans who blamed her for Kurt's death, against her own family when they got in her way. Courtney Love didn't lose these fights because she was wrong. She lost them because she was fighting the entire world simultaneously, and even someone with her level of strategic cruelty can't win that many wars at once. But here's what nobody talks about. She didn't lose everything. She kept control of Nirvana's legacy. She built her own career. She survived 3 decades of being public enemy #1. She outlasted most of her critics and proved most of her points. The cost was everything else. Her relationships, her reputation, her peace of mind, probably her sanity. She became the person she needed to be to win these fights, but that person was someone nobody could love, including herself. Live Through This remains a masterpiece. Her acting career was legitimate. Her business instincts were correct. Her media criticism was prescient. Her understanding of how women are treated in rock music was accurate.
None of that matters because she was too angry, too damaged, too willing to burn bridges to get recognition for being right. She proved her points, but she proved them in ways that made people hate the messenger more than they listened to the message. Courtney Love versus the world ended with Courtney technically winning, but completely alone. She got the estate, she got the recognition, she got to be right about everything. She just didn't get to be happy about any of it. The Queen of Grunge kept her crown, but kingdoms built on warfare are lonely places to rule. Beautiful, powerful, and completely isolated. The perfect ending for someone who chose fighting over everything, including her own happiness. If this deep dive into strategic self-destruction and perfectly justified rage scrambled your brain in interesting ways, hit that subscribe button because I've got about 15 more stories of musicians who chose violence and actually had good reasons for it. Also, like the video because Courtney would probably appreciate that her chaos is still generating revenue, which is somehow the most Courtney Love outcome possible. Right, I'm off to listen to Violet at maximum volume and contemplate how someone can be so lovable and hateable simultaneously. See you in the comments, you beautiful, non-vindictive bastards.